joining us here for the Podium Finish Live. I'm Rob Tiongson, and I'm joined alongside legendary NASCAR Hall of Famer and four-time NASCAR Cup Series champion, Jeff Gordon. What an honor to have you here in the hot seat today. How are you been doing, my friend? It's been a long time.
Yeah, thank you. It has been a while, but it's great to see you, at least virtually. And I love your backdrop. That brings back a lot of great memories. I'm even looking at some of the fans' reactions, which is always interesting too. But things are well. Sitting here at my new desk here at Hendrick Motorsports, and really enjoying this role and all the challenges that have come along with it. And we're getting ready for hopefully another great year here in 2023 in the Cup Series at Hendrick.
Absolutely. And not just that, it's NASCAR at 75. So pretty special milestone that you're a part of now, two milestones that you've been a part of for NASCAR. So super excited about that. And we'll get to those a little bit later, but this one's more of a memory lane trip for us. It's weird to say 1993 is 30 years ago, Jeff. So I hope we both don't feel too old. But
that's going to be hard. I do feel pretty old about that one, but also a lot of great memories of those 30 years.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to it because I don't think a lot of folks have talked to you about this. So I'm so stoked to talk about this. So kind of setting up the start for 1993, Jeff, obviously you came off a successful season in the then Busch Series, now Xfinity Series with Bill Davis Racing. Rick Hendrick recruited you about midway into 1992 for 93. What were your initial thoughts and expectations heading into 1993 when you were named the driver of the number 24 car?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly a huge moment for my career. You as a driver, especially once I started pursuing NASCAR, your goal is to hopefully one day make it to the Cup Series, and if you can make it to the Cup Series with a top organization, that's the ultimate, and that's what happened for me with Hendrick. I guess I had just enough of a glimpse of maybe what was ahead when we did the race. So we did one race in 1992, which most people know, right? It was Richard Petty's last race. So cool event to be a part of. But the reality of it was we were very fast. But the cars were challenging to drive, especially when you looked at these longer runs and 500 miles over a race compared to what I was doing in the Busch Grand National Series. And so we wrecked that day in 92 in October, November of 92. And that was sort of what was going to come the first half of 93, which was just, me trying to understand what it took to and I liked a loose race car. I liked a car that sort of swung the back around, but you had to do that to the extreme, the early part of a run with a full fuel load of fuel until it burned off and started shifting the weight, forward to the nose before the car really started handling the way that I liked. So, I tore up a lot of race cars in the first part of 93, but the highlight was the very first race in 93, the Daytona 500, where we finished fifth, and we're in that amazing battle there towards the end between Dale Earnhardt, Dale Jarrett, who else was a part of that? Maybe Jeff Bodine. It was a really cool battle that I got to be a part of my very first Daytona 500.
I'm glad you brought that up because that's actually what I want to segue into, because the Daytona 500, it is obviously every stock car driver's ultimate goal, aside from winning the Cup championship. It's the biggest race of the season. And it was only your second career Cup start, which is kind of crazy because you're only 22 years old, I believe, at that time, 21, 22. So, I mean, you made a big time splash in that race. You won the Gatorade 125 qualifying race. You started third, made a bold move, I think, into turn 3 and turn 4 to get the lead from Dale Jarrett, which was, to this day, still takes my breath away as a fan and a journalist. How thrilling was it to be part of that mix of the win? Because I think midway into the race, didn't you hit a tire and then you guys repaired the car and got back into contention? Is that what happened?
Yeah, I don't remember some of those details, but I look at that period of my life and in my career and Ray Evernham and his role in the team and my career. building this team together, then Rick Hendrick and his role, and just how everything was sort of coming together at that time. But I came off of a season in Busch Grand National, as you mentioned, that I was pretty confident, right? We won some big races and we were fast about everywhere we went. I think we had like 11 poles. So I came into the Cup Series, especially knowing Ray and the types of race cars he builds, the type of equipment that Hendrick Motorsports had, the horsepower under the hood, feeling, man, we're going to go, be very competitive. I didn't know what it took to win races, but I knew we'd be competitive, and we showed that in testing. So, but at the same time, my confidence got kind of brought back down to earth when we started crashing and tearing up things and the season not going so well. But that season in '93 was just special when I look back on it, but really nerve-wracking and stressful, because you want to make your splash and you're entering a NASCAR and you want it to be big. And there was hype around the rookie class that year with Bobby Labonte, Kenny Wallace, and myself, all coming from the Busch Grand National Series. And yet I wasn't living up to expectations, my own expectations, the team's expectations, or maybe, some of the media or fans either. So it was a little bit disappointing, but we had enough highlights to get us through the year, and then really kind of, break out the following year, 94.
Well, 94 was certainly, I think, the breakthrough serial moment for Jeff Gordon and that number 24 team for sure. And you talked a little bit about the cars being so different. You liked it being loose because that's kind of how you were used to driving those sprint cars and dirt track cars as a teenager and early 20 something. A lot of folks don't appreciate, though, just how different those cars were back then in 93, because obviously the Xfinity cars or Busch cars back then, my understanding was that they had V6 motors, and now you had to go to V8 power. So I'm sure that had to be quite a wild transition too, besides the handling aspect.
Yeah. So, I mean, I was in the Busch Grand National Series for 2 years and learning stock cars, learning the tracks, but doing it with a V6, engine, a little bit lighter car. So when you move up to the Cup Series, there's so many drastic changes. Of course, a lot more horsepower, longer wheelbase car, and heavier car, but also the competition is just incredible. So it was a steep learning curve. Just those 3 or 4 first years in NASCAR, not to mention in Cup, was a very steep learning curve. And so I came from one, dirt, but also the pavement midgets and sprint cars that I was driving was so much different. I mean, you just drove the car as hard as you could from lap 1 but it was only like a 30 lap race, 40 lap race at the most. And so the way the car was set up, it didn't shift and change as drastically throughout, a race, where stock cars, one run, maybe it's 100 miles or something, it changed dramatically over that period of time. And then the track's changing, your track position, your competitors are getting better and adjusting. So, I mean, I just can't even explain to folks that to try to put it into words of how huge of a learning curve we were all on. And new crew chief basically to the Cup Series with Ray Evernham, and a brand new team. Even though Hendrick Motorsports was established, we were the third team. Was 2 teams prior to '93, and then it became 3 cars. So it was a lot of new people, a lot of new things. So I think that I look back at some of the great times and great building blocks to what became just a crazy run that we went on through the mid to late 90s, and it all kind of started in '93. But I think definitely adapting to the car was a big change, and something that I probably didn't quite. I always try to set realistic expectations, but those probably even surpassed the expectations I had of what it was going to be like to learn that car.
I can only imagine, just because I think both you and I can attest to this. When we're a little younger, not that you don't know any better, but you're willing to take on the unknown and embrace it a little bit more, a little
Mhm.
less trepidation. The older you get, the more you're like, oh, I know the risk. Let's be careful about this. Let's be more methodical. So I think I kind of understand what you're saying for sure. And then kind of going back to Daytona in the 93 season again, you talk about the rough first half of the season, but you also had a lot of great finishes throughout the year. I mean, you contended for victories at Charlotte, Michigan, Daytona again. I mean, you seem so comfortable in the super speedways, which to the outsider that seems a little surprising because you're a short track specialist. And then you showcase your prowess against the likes of Dale Earnhardt, Jeff Bodine, as you mentioned earlier. When did you realize that you and the 24 team had something special, that you guys were not just going to be a one-off hit?
Yeah. Well, first I'll touch on the short track versus super speedway. Yeah, the super speedways were all new and much different than what, I had been driving. But I always liked speed. I mean, I always liked the high bank tracks like Winchester and Salem. I always liked to, I was never afraid of the speed. It was really just more of what skill set did you need to excel at that type of a racetrack. And so when you go from Winchester, let's say in a sprint car or midget, which is a half-mile track, but very fast, and you go to a very heavy, high-powered stock car on a track like Martinsville or North Wilkesboro back then. I mean, that was a bigger change for me than going onto the mile and a halfs and even the 2.5 mile tracks. I felt like I felt like all the short track racing I had done had not prepared me at all for what I needed to do in a stock car. So at that time, I was up against guys that were late model racers and modified racers and guys that really were in a more similar car, stock car racers that grew up racing those cars on short tracks. So I had a lot to learn, and I'm super proud of the effort that we put into that challenge, if you want to call it that, from Hendrick, from myself, Ray, the setups, tapping into our teammates and just everybody focusing on making the short track program so strong. Because back then, if you were good on the short tracks, that was usually the determining factor of championships. There were more short tracks, but also, short tracks just seemed to separate, the competition a bit. So it was a big part of our focus, which if you then go to 95, when we won our first championship, 96, 97, that's what really we excelled at. We weren't just good at the mile and a half, but we were super good on the road courses and the shorter tracks. So that was a big part of the focus. And it was pretty cool to see some of the good finishes that we had on the bigger tracks. So it was, how do we take that and just expand on it? But boy, we got to put a lot of energy into these road courses and short tracks. That is what kind of led to 95 when we were a championship contender.
As a side note, before we go back into the main topic of our interview, there's a part of you kind of wish that the schedule today was happening back then, because you're like, man, road courses, all these tracks that I got great at, couldn't that be part of the series schedule back then?
Yeah, and I would have loved driving this current car with independent rear suspension, sequential gearbox. This car, all the brakes that are on this car, and just this car seems to be really suited for road courses. So I think I would have had a lot of fun with that, as well as getting the chance to compete on more road courses, and the street course coming at Chicago. I mean, that's exciting. So I would have loved that. So yeah, I mean, you can't, my career was so good. I can't look back and have many regrets, but yeah, I'm enjoying seeing where the sport's evolving to right now.
Absolutely. And we'll talk more about that towards the tail end, because I'm really excited to ask you some questions that I don't think anyone in the tour has ever asked you. So I'm going to get to those for sure. I'm like, come on, let's get to it. But 1993, I think the other part people don't need to remember is that it was kind of the first time that you and Dale Earnhardt really went wheel to wheel with each other, aside from him making his occasional starts in the Busch Series, because back then, of course, he had his number 3 car program with his team. Most folks talk about how you had the great duel at Daytona, and I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but most folks don't remember the lesson that happened at Phoenix in 1993. What was going on through all of that? Because to me, it looked like you guys were just racing each other hard. Was it just more him just trying to pull the rookie's chains a little bit, try to like get into your psyche, or more like, hey man, don't race me this way. This is how you race me.
Well, that was the uniqueness and the skill that Dale Earnhardt had, and maybe the thing he kept close to his vest and didn't share with you. So you never really knew. You just knew that you typically ended up on the bad side of things when it resulted in you in the fence. But yeah, hard to say. I mean, I had a tremendous amount of respect for Dale and learned so much from him on all the tracks, but certainly Daytona, Talladega, I feel like is probably where I learned the best lessons and applied them. But he also taught me about racecraft, right? I mean, you got to recognize who you're racing at all times, and you race everybody different. Everybody's got a different style, different personality, and you don't get the nickname Intimidator for no reason. He knew how to use the air around his car. He knew how to use the bumpers. He knew how to intimidate you, and you usually, again, like, you would end up on the bad side of it. So you didn't retaliate with a guy like Dale Earnhardt. So the lesson I learned at Phoenix that day was, and I look back on it now, and it was my fault. Should I have been wrecked for it? Probably not, but it was my fault because we're late in the stages of the race, and I'm just racing him so hard. He was better than me, right? He caught me. He was going to pass me, and I just continued to race him on the outside. And I think he got tired of it and frustrated and impatient. He's like, okay, I got to teach this rookie a lesson here, because he doesn't know how to race in the top 10 at a place like Phoenix. So I look back on it, it taught me a lot. I didn't like that I was backed in the fence, but I can promise you from that point on, and it wasn't just how I raced Dale, it's how I raced other competitors. It was, is it worth it for me right now to be fighting this hard for this position? Or is this one that I probably need to give up and get back later? And then you can look at Mark Martin. He probably took that to the extreme more than anybody that I ever raced against. Is a lot of times, before you even got to his rear bumper, he's like, go ahead. And you're like, oh, that was easy, man. Mark's the greatest guy to race against. He's so, so respectful, and you don't have to work so hard to pass him. And then all of a sudden, 25 laps later, here he comes marching right on by you and expecting the same in return. I learned a lot from a lot of guys, but that day in Phoenix, I learned, to know when to race hard and know when not to.
Yeah, I'd say from that moment on, you became not only a young, talented driver, but one that not only commanded respect, but gave respect to his competitors. Because there really weren't a lot of moments afterwards that I think, a lot of controversy with you and your drivers. Maybe late in your career, but that's because, that's the cycle of life. But hey, I understand. That's what happens in racing and in life.
You're putting that politely. I appreciate that.
That's why I'm a journalist, Jeff, and that's why you're the race car driver I followed as a kid. So let's fast forward to 1995, because I'm sure you're glad I didn't ask you about the mustache and mullet. So don't worry, I'm not going to ask about that. Let's fast forward to 95, because obviously that's a magical year for the 2014. Really what put Hendrick Motorsports front and center as a true title contender that it's still known by today. When you got your first wins at Charlotte and Indy, like you pointed out, in 94, and then 95, I think you got like 7 victories and so many pole positions. I couldn't even count. I don't want to cheat and look at Racing Reference. Did you ever imagine in your wildest dreams having an incredible year like 1995, much less what happened subsequently in 97, 98, and 01?
Yeah. I knew we were building on something special, and I think 94 solidified that for us by, winning 2 huge events, right? The first win coming at the 600, which, everybody knows that's a grueling race. And when you win that race, you earn a lot of respect, especially the way we won it. And then the Brickyard 400 was also a very challenging, tough race. And I think we started standing out as a team to be reckoned with, a team that compete for big races and wins. And I think what happened in 95 was an accumulation of that, as well as the introduction of the new Monte Carlo coming from Chevrolet. So we went from being a really good, strong team to having the superior car that year. And it looked like it was going to be, well, we're going to be competing with others in Chevrolet Monte Carlos, which then put us up against, Bobby Labonte and Dale Earnhardt and maybe Sterling Marlin or maybe Ernie Irvin. I can't remember who was in the forecourt at that time, but it, so early on in our teammates, of course. So, but early on the season, I realized, wow, this car is good. I think we won the race at Atlanta and we were just super strong and it was exciting. It was like, wow, we've got a real opportunity here. And then you build momentum as a team, right? You build confidence and momentum in what you're doing. It's working. You pit crews on your strategy and your the pit calling by Ray and the setups, and then my driving was matching up with that. And then all of a sudden you just feel somewhat unstoppable. I mean, it wasn't that easy. We had to go through a lot that year and some great battles, and others had a great car too. But at the end, we pulled it out, and after that, it was game on. We want to go race for a championship every year, which for you look, I mean, that 5-year streak or 4-year streak, I guess, from 95 through 98 was just an incredible run. If people want to watch this and go look up stats, if they're not familiar with them, go look up those stats, right? Because even though we didn't win the championship in 96, came in second to our teammate Terry Labonte, we still won a lot of races, led a lot of laps, and then went and won the next 2 championships after that. So I mean, that 4-year streak is something that really kind of set the tone for my place in the sport, in my opinion. And then of course you mentioned you throw in 2001 too. We went off base a little bit for a couple of years in 99, 2000, and feel like some of our competitors were better than us, and we just weren't maybe clicking. You would think after 98, having a dominating season, winning 13 races and doing all we did in 98 to win the championship, that would continue 99, but it didn't. There's a lot of stories there that we may or may not get into, with Ray going to Dodge and me staying at Hendrick. But we brought in Robbie Loomis. It just took a little while for us to really get synced up, and it was awesome to be able to do that in 2001 and go have another championship season.
Absolutely. I mean, I think of 2001 onward as like the second definitive chapter of your career, and probably the one that I look more towards. I mean, not that I love the 90s era, of course, but when I look at who you are as a person, as a driver that I admire a ton, it's what you accomplish afterwards, because most folks would have a hard time trying to follow up after that. But you just kept constantly looking for excellence. You brought the series to such higher levels. And not coincidentally, why I'm doing this in 2023 is because I want to bring up a happy memory within this time frame, going forward from the championship years to 2003 when you hosted SNL. I mean, that is probably one of my favorite episodes of that show. I still laugh about Ricky Funk. Yes. And my family was like cracking up. She still quotes it to me. She's like, Jeff was so funny in that. I was like, I did not expect that. I'm she's acting like I'm your friend back then. So yeah, I mean,
that was special. I think it just goes back to show you, I mean, you think about, where things are at today and what athletes or race car drivers are doing big shows or events like that. And it just shows you the popularity of the sport at that time. And I was very fortunate that my place in it was towards the top, and it created amazing opportunities. The things that NASCAR was doing, the things our sponsors were doing to promote the sport, new venues, going to new tracks, and us being able to create a team and an organization that was excelling at that time. It was amazing. It was amazing to be a part of it and just see all the things that came across my desk as far as what you're being asked to do, whether it was commercials or TV shows or things like Saturday Night Live. And I never dreamed that I would do it. I actually turned it down. I know this sounds silly, but I don't want to say turned it down. I ignored it the first time. So NBC was now part of the sport and broadcasting, and gave me a letter that was an invitation to do Saturday Night Live as a host. And I thought it was a joke. It wasn't a joke, but it was, I can't do that. There's no way I'm going to do that. I would embarrass myself and it would be terrible and everybody would laugh at me, and not in a good way. So then I luckily got a second letter opportunity to do it the next year. And at that point I was in a different place in my life, and had some friends around me that knew more about New York and the show, and just said, you do not turn that down. You absolutely have to say yes. And I look back on it now, and I think it's one of my greatest accomplishments, and certainly one of the most challenging things that I've ever done, and also the most fun. So it's something that I will always cherish. It was, taking me completely out of my comfort zone, and I went for it. I was like, hey, I'm here now, and you're around this creative environment of writers and staff and actors, and you really get embraced in it, and you go, you know what, I'm not going to hold back. I'm going to go all out. And so I did. And Ricky Funk was that moment for me to just let it all out there. And I look back and crack up at it, but yeah, it was a highlight for me, for things that I did off the track.
I'm surprised you never used the Abracadabra song as your Bristol introduction song. You should have done that in your final season, but hey, it's all good.
You're right. I should have. And well, I can't do it over again, but that would have been good.
That's all good.
Could have been my walkout song for my final race at home, the Homestead race.
I was gonna say that I would have cried happy and laughing tears on that one for sure. I know we only have a couple more minutes left, and I'm so appreciative of your time, Jeff. So just have a couple more questions before we wrap up this latest interview with you. A lot of folks I don't know if they've actually asked you this question. I feel like you are the greatest change in the NASCAR team owner recruitment process, because when you're coming along, most people wanted the polished older product. You were like the first raw, unproven, but you have potential type of driver. What are your thoughts on the fact that you have changed the landscape of how team owners build their teams and gather their drivers and personnel?
Yeah, I feel like what I love about NASCAR, and I was actually in a conversation about this the other day. You probably saw where we announced this partnership to go to the Indy 500 with Kyle Larson as a driver, which I'm super excited about that. But it's something that I never got a chance, to do, and part of that process was, IndyCar just looked different at that time, and when I tried to pursue it, it just was, the team owners were looking for something different. They weren't looking for what I had to offer. And NASCAR embraced that. The owners and the crew chiefs and the people that I came across were like, man, this guy, he'd be a great fit for our team. He can get up on the wheel, make our car go fast and win races. And we want that. And so, when I look at that, I'm so appreciative of the NASCAR ownership and community, and then where my place is in the history. And so I think that's just sort of the culture in NASCAR, that they always are looking for who's going to get the results for the team, whether it be on the track or marketing off the track. So you're always looking for that total package. And I do think that, at that time, prior to 93, it was about veteran drivers that had lots of experience. Those were the guys getting it done. And why do you want to take a chance or a risk on a young guy that's going to tear up a lot of equipment? And yet Rick Hendrick did that, and it turned into being very successful. So, and then if you look later, right, Jimmy Johnson and Tony Stewart, Matt Kenseth, it just seemed to me like there were just more Dale Jr., just guys that came in at a young age and were able to win fairly quickly. And I think that's when it truly changed the landscape. So I don't know, I was one of maybe a few that sort of got the movement going, and it continued on from there and expanded.
It's an incredible change for sure, and a nice thing that's kept NASCAR going, to say the least. I know you have to get going, and if I may ask this last question, because this is really kind of stewing in my head for a long time. Which driver today reminds you most of yourself in the Cup Series within Hendrick and outside of Hendrick?
Oh my goodness. Uh, I mean, I guess outside of Hendrick, I would say maybe a Tyler Reddick in a way. You know, I have to go back to guys that have dirt, experience, and then have brought that and adapted to the stock cars. Certainly Kyle Larson stands out at Hendrick. I mean, I don't know. I don't know if I looked at myself as being as talented as these guys at that time. I feel like that evolved for me as I was growing my career in NASCAR and with Hendrick. But yeah, I mean, I guess I just look at guys that have the ability to adapt to different circumstances and tracks and can excel on about any of them, because that's what I prided myself in and what we were able to do with the 24 team. And that's what I see in those guys. They can win on road courses, short tracks, and super speedways.
That's an interesting take, Jeff. And now I'm going to have to pay more close attention to those two to see if they have a little echo of the driver behind me right here.
Yeah. I mean, it might not be the personality as much, but just to me, it's more of what they do, on track that I can somewhat relate to.
Absolutely. Well, Jeff, I really appreciate your time. I know you're a very busy man, obviously, these days. So I wanted to thank you so much for joining me here for the hot seat and for, the podium finish. Is there anything you wanted to say to the fans at home who are preparing for NASCAR at 75 or just big fans of yours in general?
Well, first of all, you're a great interviewer, and your knowledge of not just the sport, but I could clearly tell you did a lot of your homework on my career and as well as following it along the way yourself. So thank you for that. And I think people that are going to watch this are going to appreciate that as well, because that means you're always going to get a little bit something unique and different that maybe somebody hasn't seen before in an interview or an interview of mine. But other than that, no, I'm super excited about 75th anniversary. I think this year is going to be, so many things are going to be pulled into this year that showcase where the sport has come from, how it's gotten to where it is today, and where it's heading in the future. And its staying power and how it's continuing to grow even today. And I mean, I look at North Wilkesboro, right, as sort of that nucleus of what the 75th anniversary is all about. You're going to take a track that hasn't had a cup race since 1996, which is crazy to think. And we're going to have an all-star race there. And I think the fans are going to get one heck of a show. I think it's going to be an event that is going to be very sought after and have a lot of eyeballs on. And so it's going to talk about, our where we're at today, but show a lot of the future, the past and the history. So I think there's going to be a lot of moments like that this year. And I'm excited to be a part of it, and certainly to be a part of it from Hendrick Motorsports' standpoint of us going out and competing in the 75th anniversary. And you're right, I was a part of the 50th anniversary as a driver, and I know our teams are extremely excited to do what they can to continue to grow the sport in their 75th year.
Absolutely. I wish I had more time. Maybe we should do another interview sometime down the road, maybe in person, because I will be at races this year, because I'd love to talk about 1998. Ooh, that is.
I don't mind. I don't mind talking about 1998. That was one spectacular year. So let's absolutely do that, whether it's in person or virtual. I enjoy talking with you and hope to do it again soon.
Thank you, Jeff. And what you said earlier, that really touched my heart, my friend. Thank you so much. Best of luck in the first half of the season. Let's catch up hopefully at COTA, where I live in Austin. So yeah, man, thanks so much. You're a huge inspiration to me. And if it wasn't for you, I don't know what I'd be doing in my life. So you made a young man like me so happy.
Well, thank you. And I'm sure you're inspiring a lot of young kids out there that aspire to do what you do and have your passion for racing too. So thank you. Appreciate it. Enjoyed it.
Thank you, Jeff. Take care.